There are rules in the whispering forest. Unspoken perhaps, but understood by every creature who called it home. Rule number 1, never go out during the new moon. Rule number 2, respect the old oak's territory. And rule number 3, the most important rule of all, never, ever trust a predator. Rusty knew these rules, had lived by them his entire life. A red squirrel with a tail like autumn fire and eyes sharp enough to spot danger from 3 trees away, he'd survived 4 winters in these woods by being careful, by being smart, by knowing when to hide, which made what he was about to do either incredibly brave or incredibly foolish. It started like any other autumn evening, the kind where the air smells of wet earth and pine needles, where the sunset paints the forest floor in shades of amber and gold. Rusty had spent the day gathering acorns, his cheeks stuffed with the last of the season's harvest. His tree, a sturdy pine near the heart of the forest, had been his home for 3 years. He knew every branch, every hollow, every creaking sound it made when the wind blew. So when he heard the sound that night, a low, pained wheeze coming from inside his own home, he knew immediately. Something was wrong. Something was inside. Rusty froze at the entrance to his nest, his heart hammering against his ribs. The scent hit him first, feathers, blood, and something else. Something ancient and primal that made every hair on his body stand on end. Predator. His mind screamed at him to run, to find shelter in one of the neighboring trees and wait until morning. To follow rule number 3, but this was his home, his tree, his sanctuary, the place where he'd weathered storms and survived the harshest winters, and whoever, or whatever, was inside. They were hurt. Slowly, carefully, Rusty climbed inside. The nest was dark. Darker than usual. Something large was blocking the moonlight that normally filtered through the entrance. And then he saw them. Eyes. 2 enormous golden eyes, glowing in the darkness like twin moons. Eyes that belonged to the one creature every squirrel feared above all others. An owl, not just any owl. A great horned owl. Silent Death, they called her kind. The phantom hunters who could pluck a squirrel from a branch before they even knew danger was near. Rusty's body locked in pure instinctual terror. Every muscle screamed, run. Every nerve fired escape. Every survival instinct honed over millions of years of evolution demanded he flee. But he didn't. Because in those massive golden eyes, Rusty saw something he never expected to see in a predator. Fear. The owl was injured. Her left wing hung at an unnatural angle, bent and broken. Blood matted the feathers on her chest, and she was trembling, this massive, terrifying hunter, trembling like a leaf in a storm. Please, her eyes seemed to say, please don't hurt me. It was absurd. Impossible. An owl, a creature that could kill him with one talon, was afraid of him. Rusty should have left, should have reclaimed his territory, driven the intruder out, followed the ancient rules that had kept his kind alive for generations. Instead, he did something that would change both their lives forever. He stayed. The first night was the hardest. Rusty pressed himself against the far wall of the nest, as far from the owl as the small space would allow. Neither of them slept. The owl watched him with those unblinking golden eyes, and Rusty watched back, waiting for the moment those talons would strike. But the moment never came. By dawn, exhaustion had dulled fear into something else. Something almost like curiosity. The owl hadn't moved all night, hadn't even tried to attack. She just sat there, breathing in shallow, pained gasps, her broken wing tucked awkwardly against her body. When morning light finally filled the nest, Rusty got his first clear look at his unexpected guest. She was magnificent. Even injured, even terrified, she was the most beautiful and terrifying thing he'd ever seen. Feathers the color of tree bark and shadow, ear tufts that looked like small horns, and a beak sharp enough to crack bones, a beak that was currently trembling. She's starving, Rusty realized with a jolt. An injured owl couldn't hunt, and an owl that couldn't hunt. He thought about leaving her there, about letting nature take its course. Predator and prey, that was the way of things, the natural order. But when he looked into those golden eyes again, he didn't see a predator. He saw someone's daughter, someone's mother perhaps, someone who was just trying to survive, same as him. Rusty made a decision that would have made his ancestors ashamed. He left the nest and returned an hour later with mushrooms. Tender shoots, even a few grubs he'd dug from beneath the bark of a dead log. It wasn't meat. Owls needed meat, but it was something. The owl stared at the offering like she couldn't quite believe what she was seeing. Then slowly she lowered her head and ate. That was the moment everything changed. Over the next 3 days, an impossible routine formed. Rusty would venture out at dawn to forage, always returning before the afternoon when the other predators stirred. He brought her food, better food as he learned what she could stomach. Beetles, moths, even a field mouse he'd found already dead, caught in a thorn bush. And slowly, impossibly, the owl began to heal. But more than that, they began to understand each other. Rusty learned that her name was Nix. At least that's what he called her. The low, musical hoot she made sounded like Nix to his ears, and she seemed to respond to it. He learned that she'd been struck by lightning during the storm 3 nights before, that she'd been looking for her nest, for her 3 owlets, who were still too young to hunt on their own. And most importantly, he learned that sometimes the rules we live by aren't always right. Nix learned something too. She learned that the small, nervous squirrel who brought her food and cleaned her wounds and kept her company in the long, dark hours of night was braver than any creature she'd ever known. By the 5th day, Nix could stand. By the 7th, she could flex her wing without crying out in pain. And by the 10th day, she could fly. It was time for her to leave. Rusty woke on the 11th morning to find Nix perched at the entrance to the nest, silhouetted against the pale dawn sky. Her wing was still weak. He could see the slight tremor in it, but it would hold. She could go home. This is good, Rusty told himself, ignoring the strange ache in his chest. This is what's supposed to happen. Nix turned to look at him one last time. In her eyes, Rusty saw gratitude, respect, and something else. Something that looked almost like regret. Then she spread her wings and launched into the sky. Rusty watched her go, a small red shape alone in a suddenly too large nest. He'd done the right thing. Saved a life, broken every rule, and somehow survived to tell the tale. So why did it feel like he'd lost something? He was still pondering this when he heard it. A sound that made his blood freeze. Barking, not the high-pitched yipping of foxes. The deep guttural barking of dogs. Hunting dogs, and they were coming closer. Rusty knew that sound, knew what it meant. Humans with dogs and guns hunting in the forest. They came sometimes during autumn, looking for deer or rabbits. And if they found a squirrel, he pressed himself flat against the branch, making himself as small as possible. His tree was isolated, exposed. No nearby branches to jump to. Nowhere to run. The dogs appeared below, 3 of them, their noses to the ground. And behind them, 2 humans carrying long metal sticks that gleamed in the morning light. One of the dogs looked up, saw him, started barking frantically, pawing at the base of the tree. The humans raised their weapons. This was it. This was how it ended. Rusty had survived 4 winters, countless storms, even befriended a predator. Only to end here, alone, trapped. He closed his eyes. And then the sky screamed. It was a sound unlike anything Rusty had ever heard. A shriek of pure fury, primal and devastating. The dogs yelped and scattered. The humans shouted in surprise, ducking as a massive shadow plummeted from above. Nix. She dove at the hunters like a feathered missile, talons extended, wings spread wide enough to block out the sun. She didn't strike, didn't need to. The sheer terror of a great horned owl in full attack dive was enough. The humans stumbled backward, shouting. The dogs fled into the underbrush, tails between their legs. And within seconds the hunters were retreating, crashing through the forest the way they'd come. Nix circled once, twice, making sure they were truly gone. Then she landed on the branch beside Rusty. For a long moment, they just looked at each other. Predator and prey, hunter and hunted, 2 creatures who should have been enemies, who had become something else entirely. Thank you, Rusty wanted to say, though he had no words she would understand. Nix seemed to hear it anyway. She bobbed her head once, then leaned forward and very gently, impossibly gently, preened the fur on top of Rusty's head with her deadly beak. It was the most terrifying and tender gesture Rusty had ever experienced. But Nix didn't leave, not yet. Instead, she did something that confused Rusty completely. She hooted 3 low urgent notes and took off flying. Then she circled back, landed beside him, and hooted again. She wanted him to follow. Follow, Rusty thought. Follow where?
I can't fly!
But Nix was insistent. She took off again, flying low through the trees, slower than usual, clearly waiting for him. Something in her urgency sparked recognition in Rusty. This was the same desperate energy she'd had when she first arrived. When she'd been looking for her babies, Rusty's heart clenched. He remembered now. Nix had been searching for her nest when the lightning struck. Her owlets, alone, defenseless, probably starving by now. She needed help. And for some reason, she was asking him. Rusty took a deep breath and launched himself from branch to branch, following the diving, swooping shape of the owl above. It was insane. It was dangerous. It was everything his instincts screamed against. But Nix had saved his life. And before that, he'd saved hers. Sometimes the rules had to be broken. They traveled for nearly an hour, Rusty leaping between trees while Nix glided above, guiding him deeper into a part of the forest he'd never explored. It was older here, darker. The trees grew so close together their branches intertwined, creating a canopy so thick that barely any sunlight reached the ground. Finally, Nix stopped at an enormous dead oak. Its trunk was hollowed out, and high up in the hollow, Rusty could hear them. Tiny, desperate peeping sounds. The owlets. But there was a problem. The trunk was smooth. No branches nearby, no handholds. Even for a squirrel, it would be nearly impossible to climb. And Nix, with her still healing wing, couldn't carry food up to them. She could barely carry herself. That's when Rusty understood why she'd brought him. He was small, lightweight, and more importantly, he could climb anything. You want me, he realized, staring up at the impossible height, to go up there, into a nest, full of baby owls, who will probably try to eat me. Nix hooted softly. In her golden eyes, Rusty saw something he'd never thought he'd see in a predator. Trust. She trusted him. With her children, with the most precious things in her world, Rusty started climbing. It took 20 minutes of careful, terrifying work, but he finally reached the hollow. Inside, 3 tiny owlets huddled together, fluffy, hungry, and making the most pitiful sounds Rusty had ever heard. They looked at him with enormous eyes, confused. Was this food? It was small and furry, but it didn't smell like food. Rusty's heart was hammering so hard he thought it might explode. He was inside a predator's nest, surrounded by baby predators. One wrong move But he thought of Nix, of how she'd trembled in his nest, afraid and alone, of how she'd trusted him when every instinct told her not to. Carefully, Rusty searched the nest. There, in the corner, a cache of food that Nix must have stored before the storm. Dried meat, field mice, all dried out now but still edible. He started breaking the food into smaller pieces, offering them to the owlets. They took it hesitantly at first, then more eagerly. Their peeping turned from desperate to contented. Below, he heard Nix hoot. It sounded like relief, like gratitude, like something that might have been joy. Rusty spent the next hour feeding the owlets, making sure each one ate their fill. They were beautiful in a strange, fluffy, slightly terrifying way, and they were starting to look at him not as food, but as friend. When he finally climbed back down, Nix was waiting. She pressed her face against his tiny body, as close to a hug as an owl could manage, and Rusty felt something warm bloom in his chest. This was why he'd broken the rules. This moment right here. Rusty returned to the hollow 3 more times over the next week, always guided by Nix. Each time he brought food for the owlets, whatever he could carry. And each time they greeted him with excited peeping, like he was family, like he belonged. Nix's wing grew stronger, the owlets grew bigger, and eventually the day came when they didn't need him anymore. Rusty knew it was coming, knew that this strange, impossible friendship had always been temporary. Owls and squirrels weren't meant to be friends. The forest had rules for a reason, but knowing it didn't make it hurt any less. On their last visit to the hollow, Rusty watched as Nix taught her owlets to fly, short, clumsy hops from one branch to another. They were ready to hunt, ready to live the life they were meant to live, a life that didn't include him. As the sun began to set, painting the forest in shades of purple and gold, Nix landed beside Rusty one final time. The 3 owlets perched nearby, watching with curious, intelligent eyes. For a long moment, predator and prey just sat together in comfortable silence. Then Nix did something extraordinary. She reached out with one massive wing and very gently pulled Rusty close. It was awkward. Owls weren't built for hugging, but the gesture was unmistakable. "Thank you," it said, "for seeing past what I am. For being brave when you had every reason to be afraid. For teaching me that sometimes the rules are wrong." Rusty leaned into the embrace, memorizing the feeling. The warmth, the impossible, beautiful absurdity of it all. Then Nyx released him. She hooted once, a long, melodic sound that echoed through the darkening forest, and took flight. Her 3 owlets followed, their wings strong and sure. Rusty watched them disappear into the evening sky, 4 shadows merging with the darkness. He was alone again. But not really, because now he knew something that changed everything. He knew that the world was bigger than the rules, that sometimes the scariest things could become the most beautiful. That predator and prey, hunter and hunted, could look past their natures and see each other. Really see each other. And most importantly, he knew that home wasn't just a place. It was a feeling, a choice. A moment when 2 impossible creatures decided to trust each other, despite everything telling them not to. Rusty climbed back to his tree as the stars began to appear. His nest felt emptier now, quieter, but also fuller somehow, richer. He'd lost his sanctuary for 10 days. But he'd gained something far more valuable. He'd gained proof that kindness wasn't weakness. That bravery wasn't the absence of fear. It was doing the right thing despite it. And he'd gained a story that would echo through the whispering forest for generations to come. 3 months later, on a particularly cold winter night, Rusty woke to a sound outside his nest. Something heavy landing on the branch. His heart jumped. Old instincts never truly died. But when he peeked outside, he found a gift. A freshly caught rabbit, still warm, and perched in the tree across from him, barely visible in the moonlight. 4 familiar shapes. Nyx and her owlets, now nearly full-grown. She hooted softly. Not a threat, a greeting. And in that hoot, Rusty heard everything he needed to hear. "We remember. We'll always remember. And whenever you need us, we'll be here." From that day forward, Rusty never went hungry through the winter. There was always food outside his nest, offerings left in the night. And on the darkest evenings, when other predators prowled the forest floor, there were shadows overhead. Silent guardians keeping watch. The other squirrels thought Rusty was the luckiest creature in the forest. They didn't know why predators seemed to avoid his territory, why his tree was always safe, why he seemed to fear nothing. But Rusty knew. He knew that sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is also the most important. He knew that the rules were meant to protect us, but sometimes they needed to be broken. And he knew, without a shadow of doubt, that when you save a life, when you choose compassion over fear, when you see past the surface to the beating heart beneath, you don't just change one life, you change everything. The whispering forest whispered its approval. Or perhaps it was just the wind. Rusty liked to think it was something more.